assist you. Next up in our webinar series is Angela Guido, founder at Career Protocol. Hi, Angela. Thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Sarah. Happy to be here.
A quick intro on Career Protocol. Career Protocol is the web's most refreshing destinations for no-nonsense career advice and awesome professional development coaching. Angela's helped thousands of MBAs achieve their career dreams through a combination of teaching and consulting. If you work with her, you will cultivate the self-awareness, communication skills, and relationships that will transform your career from meh to holy cow, amazing. So that's pretty great. Angela has her MBA from the University of Chicago and consulting and recruiting experience from 5 years at the Boston Consulting Group. More than anything else, though, she considers herself a student of human nature. She's endlessly curious about what unites us, what differentiates us, and how each of us can fulfill our unique potential in life. You can sign up for a free career strategy session with Angela at careerprotocol.com. Angela, our listeners are really excited to hear your thoughts as they apply and get ready for business school. So without further ado, I'd like to dive into some questions.
That sounds awesome.
Our first question today, for people still researching schools and applying, how can they be sure that their target list contains the right set of schools? And part two, what are some of the important criteria to consider that might get overlooked by some applicants when thinking about where to apply?
Okay, that's a great couple of questions. Let me tackle the first one first. So I think your first question was how do applicants make sure they have the right set of schools that they're applying?
That's right.
Okay, perfect. So I have a specific philosophy about this. I really think that when you're facing such a huge career pivot as the MBA, I mean, those of us who have MBAs, we all would probably agree that of everything we've done in our career, nothing determined our future trajectory more than the MBA itself. And so when you're facing something so huge, I think you have to have two minds about it. On the one hand, you really need to aim for the stars. And so, if Harvard and Stanford are your dream schools, then you have to apply. It doesn't matter what anyone tells you or whether you think you're going to get in or not. You have to aim high because you're never going to have the chance to do it again. And you'll probably always look back and regret not trying. So you need to aim high. But at the same time, you really need to keep your feet on the ground, because if you do any research into the statistics, you know that Harvard and Stanford have an acceptance rate of like 6 to 10%, depending on what year you're looking at. And so the odds are really, really stacked against you at those schools, no matter who you are. So you really need to create a mix of schools that gives you the chance to aim high while keeping your feet on the ground. And the most practical advice I can give you about how to determine which schools are aiming high and which schools are feet on the ground schools for you. And this truly is a personal thing. So over the last 10 years, I've probably had one-on-one conversations with, it might even be as many as 2,000 people. It's probably more like 1,500, but I've talked to well over 1,000 people about their MBA profiles. And what I find is that people tend to have a really bad sense of where they stack up, both on the upside and the downside. Like I've talked to people who I thought were aiming way too low. And then I've talked to people who didn't have an accurate sense of where they belonged. So the best place to start is to look at the quantifiable aspects of your application. And that's your GMAT score or your GRE and your GPA. And the GPA, of course, includes the school you studied at. Was it, an Ivy League school? Was it a really great school, or was it a lesser known school? And then your course of study. So if you majored in finance, that kind of gives you a little bit more credibility than if you majored in philosophy, like I did, for example. But they roll all of this into your GPA. And so you just want to look and see. And the rankings, this is why the rankings are really useful, is because you can see the 80 percentile range or the average scores and GPAs for all of the schools. So the best place to start is to say, okay, here's my GPA, here's my GMAT GRE. Where am I at the average? And wherever you're at the average, above that, are, going to be probably reach schools, and below that are probably going to be safer schools. But even that's not black and white. That's just really a starting point. It probably goes without saying that you should get a consultation. That you can talk to me, you can talk to any number of professionals in this field who will give you a sense of more specifically where you stand vis-a-vis your experiences and your background and all of that. But that's the best place to start to determine your school list, is to figure out where you're competitive and then put some above that line and some at that line and some below that line. So that's the first question. And then the second question was?
Things that sometimes get overlooked by applicants as far as criteria for schools.
For school selection. So determining where they want to be.
Yeah.
Okay. I think the number one criteria that people overlook in this process is pedagogy, because all the different schools have very different philosophies about how they're going to turn you into a business leader. And so a school like Harvard or Darden, where you went, Sarah, they put a lot of emphasis on the case method. So a big percentage of your learning is based on doing some homework, reading up on a case, and then coming and debating it with your classmates, some of whom will have had really relevant experience, and a lot of whom, possibly including you, won't have. So the learning there, it's really a dialectic process, and you're learning more from your own process of communication and from your peers than you are from professors. Now, this kind of learning environment for me would have been a disaster, because I love the ivory tower. I just want to sit in a chair and have a really smart person talk at me. Like, I actually really love that. And that's that kind of pedagogy, the lecture format. You'll see it at every school, but you'll see very little of it at Harvard. You'll see a lot more of it at a place like Booth, for example, where I went. And a lot of schools will have a mix. I mean, even at Booth, you'll do cases. So it's never 100% one way or the other. But doing a little bit of research into what the school's pedagogical philosophy is and what's the right choice for you, given where you are. And this includes everything from how the classes are structured to how the curriculum is structured. So again, Harvard, your first year, for example, you sit in the same chair, in the same room, with the same 89 people. The only thing that changes is the professor, but everything else is the same, and you get absolutely no free choice. And that's Harvard philosophy, because they think everybody really needs to start with this foundation, and then you can make your choices after that. Booth, on the other hand, there's zero required courses. You need to take 3 core courses, but other than that, you can even choose exactly how advanced your accounting is, how advanced your statistics is. So it's completely flexible. And for some people, flexibility is really important. And for other people, they prefer to have the shared core with their classmates. So yeah, that's what I would say is, and to refer back to the earlier question about how to think about applying. To some extent, the question of pedagogy is putting the cart before the horse, because for most people, you really want to make these refined decisions about which school is best for you after you get in. So as you're applying, most people really should be applying to 4 to 6 schools. And in that band, you're going to have a mix of fit. You're going to have some schools where you just like really feel excited, and others where you're like, you know what, I'd be okay if I went here. It's not my top choice, but I'd be okay if I went here. And so the decision about which school is perfect for you, pedagogy being one of the main criteria you need to consider, really should probably come after admission for most people.
Sure. I love that piece of advice, though, while it might seem at times that the output of an MBA on the average could be similar from school to school, but certainly not entirely true. There are so many different types of opportunities post MBA, more so than many other graduate degrees. But nonetheless, culturally and where you're going to learn well, like you said, case method versus more structured is really important for such a powerful degree. So I like that. Next up, what are the 2 pieces of advice you would give to an MBA applicant?
So, all right. So my top 2 pieces of advice related to everything I said before. The first thing is, and it's going to sound totally cliche, which is unfortunate because that means it's going to be a little bit hard to operationalize. I'm going to try and give you a tip to operationalize it. But the first piece of advice is really know yourself. And, I don't think Aristotle was the first person to say that. He said it, but, probably lots of people before him said that. Know yourself is a piece of advice that's been bouncing around humanity for eons. But it's really important in the MBA application process, because if you think about all the different pieces that the admissions committee is considering, they're looking at your grades and scores, which we talked about a minute ago. They're looking at your career trajectory so far. Have you been a top performer? Have you been promoted? Have you really achieved and accomplished things at work? Are you engaged in your community? Do you have activity beyond work that's meaningful to you where you're having an impact? So they're looking at all of these different pieces. And the part of the application that becomes the most important during the application process is really the essays, because all that other stuff is pretty much done. And so the thing that you have control over by the time you're applying is your essays and also your recommendations. I'll get to the recommendations in a second. And so what makes for amazing essays, and I've read a few thousand in my day, is authenticity. It's like just really knowing who you are and what you want and communicating that in an inspiring way. And it's the difference between someone who's a decent applicant that gets in and someone who's a decent applicant that doesn't get in. It makes all the difference, this authenticity. And so here's the tip, because know yourself is like, what the heck does that even mean? So my advice is to use the MBA application process to get to know yourself better. And so, just think about your life. Every step you've taken, you've learned something new, you've grown, you've changed. Your priorities, your values have evolved. You're a different person today than you were even last week. Never mind the last time you applied for something, 2, 4, 6, 8 years ago, depending on what your career has looked like. So really use the process to get to know yourself better and to say something new about who you are that is true. So that's the number one piece of advice. And then the second piece of advice I have is to build relationships in the process. And so that's important with your recommenders. So recommendations are really important, and the people who write on your behalf need to know you really well. They need to be able to say intimate and vivid things about what kind of an awesome professional you are. It's not enough for them to just say that you're great. They need to say how you're great and give specific examples of when you were great and what that looked like. So they need to know you really well. And that means you need to have great relationships with your recommenders. And depending on when you're watching this, there's probably time to improve your relationships with your recommenders. And no matter how great you think your relationship is, it can always be better. So work on relationships with recommenders, and then really work on relationships with the school. Because here's like a post MBA secret, which maybe we'll get to this advice in a minute, but the MBA does not magically transform you into a career ninja. It just doesn't. It gives you an amazing education. It gives you an amazing platform. It up-levels your potential for the rest of your career. But every job you get from now until the time you retire, and if you believe the GMAC study from a few years ago, that's going to be at least 3 jobs in your first 10 years after business school. If you're going to get those jobs, it's going to be because there are people who know you and like you and want to hire you. And that's how the world works. And having an MBA doesn't change that. So part of what I believe admissions committees are subtly testing for is how savvy you are about this reality of the way the world works. And so if you're connecting with current students and alumni and members of the admissions committee and professors, and I don't mean being annoying, I don't mean just like spamming people, but like really connecting. When you go to an event and you get the business card of someone who works on the admissions committee, you stay in touch with them. You update them on your progress. You treat them like a human being, like a friend. You do the same thing with students, recognizing that MBA students are the busiest people on the planet. And then you do the same thing really with even with your competitors, like even with the people who are going to be your future classmates, or, you might meet people in the process that are going to hire you after your MBA or in your second or third job. You just never know. So that's really my second piece of advice, is to be really mindful and intentional about building great relationships with the people that you come into contact with in the process.
That's great. wanted to say on your piece of advice for the essay, someone once advised me, treat your MBA application like a novel. It needs to make sense front to back, but more so, it needs to be incredibly interesting and authentic in order to separate you. And it seems so true, and certainly in your experience. Next up, what do you say to applicants who need to write their personal statements but don't really know what they want to do after business school? And just to be sure, Angela, could you tell us what a personal statement is?
Okay, I really love this question. So most schools, not all schools, but most schools ask some version of, why do you want to go to our school? What are your goals? What are your post-MBA plans? How does the MBA fit in? It's basically, you can think of it as a mission statement. They're just trying to gauge where your career is headed and how their specific MBA fits in to those plans. And not all schools ask this question. So if the school doesn't ask this question, they typically don't expect you to answer it. So keep that in mind. A school like Darden, for example, didn't ask that question this year. So it wasn't a chance necessarily to talk about your goals. It was really about something else. So be mindful of the questions. But when you're facing a personal statement question, which is about your future, it's so hard. I have to say, I have so much empathy for applicants in this situation, because the bottom line is, we all only do, look, we only have one motivator as human beings. We want to feel better. That's it. We want to feel better. So we want more money. We want a better job. We want to have more impact. We want better friends. We want to get an MBA. All of this is for the simple motivation that we just want more and we want a better life, bottom line. And so most people who are applying to business school don't have a clear picture of what that future life is going to look like. And the truth is, there's so little that you do know when you're applying about what life is going to be like, even when you get to business school, never mind after, that it's very, very hard to paint a vivid and realistic, credible, and inspiring, importantly, picture of what you're going to do post-MBA. And at least 50% of the clients that I work with and the people that I speak with come to me and they say, well, I'm not sure what I want to do. I just know I don't want to do this. And so, you can't say that in your essays because it's not inspiring, but it's also not clear. It doesn't show the admissions committee that you've thought this through and that you have a plan. So another way to think about this is that you're about to make a $250,000 investment. You're making an investment. So if you're doing that, you need to have a plan to make a return on that investment. And that's really, if you think about it that way, that's really all the admissions committee is asking you to show them. You're not committing to your future career. The admissions committee and career services really understand that as soon as your option set changes, in other words, once you get to campus and you see all the amazing companies that want to talk to you, everything changes and you have to reevaluate. They understand that. And that's part of what the value that they provide. So they're not going to follow you around with your essays and make sure that you do what you said. But they do want to understand that you have a plan to make a return on that investment. And so that means that you need to figure out a set of goals. And when I work with clients, I come up with a career game plan, which has 3 pieces. It's your vision. It's like your long-term, it's your retirement speech. Like, what does your life mean? And then it's your medium-term strategy. And that is, what are you going to do right after your MBA? What's your kind of first next target? And then there's the tactics. And the tactics are, what are all the things you're going to do between now and when you get to campus and when you go to internship recruiting that is going to help prepare you for that transition. And the more of a transition you're making, the further away you're getting from where you are now, the more tactics need to be in place. So when you're writing your personal statement, you want to think about those 3 pieces. What are the tactics? What am I doing now to learn more and network, build relationships in the field that I want to go into? Then what is the best guess that I have right now about the medium-term goal that is going to really move me ahead in my long-term objectives? And then what's the inspiring vision? Like, who am I? What is my life for? And you ideally want to include, a little bit of all of that in your essay, because it will be both inspiring and credible if you do that. And remember that this is just your best guess right now. So it's not set in stone. Like I said, you're not bound to that. They're not admitting you on condition that you only pursue that goal. But they do need to believe that you have a plan. And so approach it that way.
Writing a plan, a retirement plan, sounds like a lot of fun, particularly my optimistic personality. It sounds like I'd be writing a plan that would be quite nice, assuming I accomplished everything in the plans leading up to it.
Yeah, that's the fun part, right? To like dream big, you know?
Yeah. What can applicants do to improve their prospects and prepare themselves while waiting on admissions decisions?
Very good. Okay. So, I mean, it's just really related to exactly what I just said. So remember that the MBA doesn't magically turn you into a career ninja. You know, it doesn't magically make you employable. And so the next horizon, once you get into business school, is your internship. And it's really tempting to think that the journey is over when you get in. And to some extent it is. You know, the journey to apply and get into business school is so long. You've got the GMAT, you've got essays, you've got, you know, it is long. So you want to, you know, celebrate and give yourself a couple of weeks to celebrate. But then you really need to fix your sight on the next horizon, which is your internship. And so spending time researching companies, reflecting on who you are and what you really want, and networking, you know, building relationships, using your existing alumni network, your LinkedIn network, and as soon as it becomes available to you, the school's network, to have informational interviews, to connect with people who are doing the kinds of jobs that you think might be interesting, asking them really intelligent questions about what they do, and using that as an entree, not just to learn more about different careers, but to actually build relationships so that when you get to campus and you think, oh, I really would love to go work at, let me think of a good company, Google. There's a good one. I really would love to go work at Google. I now have 2 people at Google who know me because I gave them that informational interview. So now I can email them and say, hey, you know, is there anyone else I should speak to? How can I continue to get to know Google a little bit better? You'll already have friends on the inside. So this is something you're going to have to do sooner or later. Most people don't do it before they get to campus. And that is just such a shame, because before you get to campus, you're like totally free. You're not desperate. You're not under the gun of recruiting. And people are so willing to talk to eager people who just want to have a great conversation. But as soon as you get the desperation of a job search on you, it's a very different experience, primarily for you. So it's best to have those conversations early before you get to campus. And so that's a really good thing. You know, keep working in the direction that you want your career to go while you're waiting for admission. And then even after admission, like that's the journey. That's the journey from there, is like, what's my next career opportunity? And the longer you take, the more effort you put in before you get to campus to really think through those things and know what you want, the more leisure you'll have during your MBA, the more you'll be able to really enjoy it and also explore a little bit, rather than get pressured and like sort of shotgunned into taking the first opportunity that comes your way.
We couldn't agree more at Relish. And you know, I will say, I mean, personally, I think the number one priority after you get in is a little bit of a break and a little bit of relaxation, and just for the mind shifting to a whole new phase. But number 2, taking the time to just truly think through what you want out of it, what companies are coming to campus, what companies are not coming to campus. That is going to serve you so well once you get to campus, because it starts, as you know, right away, if not before you get there. And opportunities might fly by if you don't know what you're looking for and what might be good for you. Angela, most people go to business school because they want new career opportunities. But what is the reality of career switching for MBAs?
Okay, really good question. And so my last answer alluded to this. And I'll just, you know, it's really easy to understand when you understand that you arrive on campus towards the end of August or middle of August for most schools. For the Chicago schools, it's later, it's late September. And by around the middle of October, the resume book needs to be finalized. So in other words, the final version of your resume that's going to be shared with all the on-campus employers and recruiters needs to be finished by the middle of October. So, if you do the math, if you're at Kellogg, that gives you about 3 to 4 weeks. If you're at Harvard, you've got, maybe 2 months at most. But before you finalize that resume, you have to make a lot of decisions. So just really simply, if you want to go into management consulting, you need to have the management consulting club on your resume, because that's what flags you to firms like Bain, BCG, and McKinsey to say you're interested in consulting. And if you don't have the management consulting club on your resume, those firms might pass you up and they might not invite you to some of their special events. And that's a whole drama. You definitely want to be on their radar if you want to work for consulting firms. But on the flip side, if you want to work in banking, you want to have the finance club on your resume, and you don't want to have the management consulting club on your resume, because then it looks like you're throwing spaghetti at a wall and you don't know what you want. So you have, that's just one example, but there are other pieces. You're going to tailor your resume a little bit depending on which industries you're really targeting first and foremost. So you need to make those decisions right away. And, I know when I was in business school, and I hear this year after year from my clients, that they expect the MBA to be a little bit of a break and a little bit of a chance to reflect on who they are and what they want to do. And then I get emails from them in October, and they're like, there's too much to do. I can't do everything. I have slept 3 hours in the last week. And that's one of the great things about the MBA. In a way, it's a 2-year long, it's a 2-year long party. And I don't mean that in the frat sense. It's you're living and collaborating with amazing people that are going to be your best friends for a while. So it's really exhilarating. It's like a return to college in that regard. But there's also classes, there's clubs, there's recruiting. It's just overwhelming. And so even if recruiting didn't start right away, there's so much else going on that you're really not going to have the luxury of time to reflect and do that soul searching and experimentation that you maybe are hoping and thinking that, and I know a lot of people really hope and think the MBA is going to be that. And just the reality is that it isn't. So if you're going to do that kind of stuff, if you really want to do soul searching and experimentation, I would advise that you do as much of that as you can before you get to campus. So that means self-reflection. And this is a big thing that I do with my clients. I have this thing, I think I told you, it's called You Only MBA Once. We call it YOMO, yep, right? Yep. So I have this YOMO course that I take people through that's a series of self-examination, self-discovery exercises. And then you emerge with a decision framework so that when you get to campus and you're looking at all the options, you know for sure what you don't want, and you know what are the things that you're looking for. Things like corporate culture, things like, what kind of learning opportunities are important to you, what kinds of growth do you want to see vis-a-vis your longer term vision. So you arrive ready to explore the options of the MBA, but not just totally blue sky. Because if you arrive with no conception, you're setting yourself up for a whole lot of suffering. So I can't even remember what the question was now, but I think I answered it. So I'll stop talking. Did I answer it?
Yes. It was on career switchers, and you have it spot on, because, those who are career switchers and want to reflect, it seems like those things go together. For round 1 and round 2, and truly even round 3 applicants, round 3, even a couple months, there is a lot of time to do some of this reflection after you apply. And the application process is so cumbersome, studying for taking the GMAT, finding recommenders, all of it, that it almost seems like you have a huge break once you apply. So using that reflection there and understanding that you should is really valuable. What are some best practices for candidates on wait lists? And do you have advice for students who were offered admission at one or more schools, but waitlisted at a more desirable program?
Okay, cool. So the waitlist is in a way, I think the worst part of this whole process, because you go through all that work and then you're ready for this climax. And honestly, in some ways, you just want an answer and you take rejection, but then you get the waitlist and the journey continues. And different schools have different philosophies. They have different ways of managing their wait lists. I'll just give you an example from my own life. The big joke among me and my classmates at Booth, and this is like, a long time ago, is that I'm still waiting to hear from Wharton. I'm on the Wharton wait list. Because I was put on the Wharton wait list, and I was actually put on several wait lists, and I took my name off all of them except for Wharton. And then I waited, and they put me on the last list of 25 people. And if someone dropped out of, school at the last minute, they were going to call me up. And at that point, I wasn't going to go. I was committed to Booth, but I was curious. So I stayed on the list, and they never called me. They never released me. They never gave me any information at all. So the big joke was like, well, let's just, as soon as I hear from Wharton, you guys, I'm out of here. But that gives you an illustration of how the waitlist can sometimes be. It can really drag on and on and on and on. And it's not that easy to understand what to do, because if they put you on the wait list, it typically means yes and, to borrow a phrase from improv. It means yes, they like you. They're not going to put you on the wait list if there's something really, really wrong with you. If they put you on the wait list, it's because they like you and they believe that you more or less belong at their school, but they're trying to manage one of two things. This has been my experience. There's two things that they're managing for in the waitlist process. The first is portfolio strategy. So especially if you come from an overrepresented demographic, like, there are a lot of management consultants applying to business school. There are a lot of engineers, especially from certain geographies, applying to business school. So if you're in one of those categories, they may decide to push your application to the next round so that they can have the complete picture of all the people like you who are applying, so that they can choose the best, because they can't have a class full of management consultants and engineers. They need also English teachers, and, they need scientists, and they need investment bankers. They need to have a diverse class. So especially if you're from an overrepresented demographic, sometimes they just put you on the wait list because they just want to wait and see. They just want to wait and see who else applies that's in your category, and then they'll choose the best from the group. So that's one reason. The second reason they put you on the wait list is yield management. So they put you on the wait list because there's just something about you that makes them concerned that if they let you in, you might say no, and you might go to another school. And they have to be really mindful of their yield because it affects their rankings. So if there's just a shadow of a doubt that maybe you might go to another school, sometimes they'll put you on the wait list and kind of then make you prove that you really want to be there. And so in both cases, your best strategy while you're on the wait list is to demonstrate your commitment and passion for the school. And so this goes back to everything I said about relationships. So this is the time to be reaching out to current students, going to events, visiting campus, if that's at all possible, especially if you didn't do it before. Definitely visit campus if you didn't do it before. But even if you did, it's still a good idea to do that. Most schools will allow you to send updates of some kind, whether it's a higher GMAT score or a letter detailing what has changed. And whenever you communicate with the school, you should be clarifying in concrete and vivid ways how and why the school is still really the place you see yourself in the fall, and really why it's still your top choice. So, if the issue is demographic, if it's portfolio strategy, that part you can't change. You can't change your demographic, but you can really show them that their school is where you really want to be, and they're human. They can't help but be influenced by that. So, and then of course, if you're on the wait list because of yield reasons, then that's the best strategy, is to really show them that you really want to be there. And, I'll say this for everyone. If your GMAT is below the average of your target school and you're on the wait list, take the GMAT again. Like, I'm not saying that that's the reason you are waitlisted, but a higher GMAT raises the school's average GMAT, and it's only going to help them. So if you're on the wait list and your GMAT is at or below the school's average, just take the GMAT again. And the reason I say that is because if that's the school where you really want to be, you have to imagine the future, right? Imagine that you get rejected. Would you regret not having at least tried to get your GMAT up? Probably. So just take it again if you're at the average or below. And then the strategy is exactly the same if you're waitlisted at one school and in at another school or other schools. You got to keep, if you really want to go to that school where you're waitlisted, you've got to do the things that I've said, really communicate with them, show them that that's where you want to be, make that real for yourself. And then, if you're forced to make a decision on the other schools, then do that, commit to your top choice among whatever other schools you have, recognizing that you will lose your deposit if you go to the school where you're waitlisted. But for most people, that's not a meaningful loss.
Some great pieces of advice there. And I'll add that, leading up to admissions, what you said there about being on the wait list makes it all the more true to show that authenticity in the application process. Once an applicant has decided on a school, what can they do to prepare themselves during the months leading up to the start of their first year? Also, what other advice do you have for incoming MBAs to make the most of their business school experience?
Okay, great question. And I think it sounds like two questions, but it's really the same. It's really one question. And, so my philosophy when I work with candidates is to aim past the target. So this is something that I learned in martial arts. If you want to, and I've never done this, but if you want to punch someone out, if you want to knock them out with a punch, you have to direct your force not at their nose, but you have to direct the force to the wall behind them. You have to really aim past the target. And that makes it, hugely more likely that you're going to hit the target. And so as an MBA applicant, that means that you want to approach the whole process really from the very beginning. Don't think of this as I'm trying to get into business school. Think of this as I'm trying to get my next job, which is going to happen to be after my MBA. And so that's where the personal statement and doing research on your goals and your values and putting together a plan for your career that is credible and that you would be willing to follow today if you had to, really put that work in advance. And that's going to make you a more credible and inspiring candidate, but it's also going to set you up for success later once you get in, because now you have a plan that you can at least revisit and change. And a lot of people do change plans, of course, but it's easier to change an existing plan than to never have a plan and just kind of drift. So I think, a lot of the advice that I've given is applicable both before you apply and after you apply, but it's kind of the same thing. So the next target, right? The next target from when you get into business school is your internship. So that means you need to be aiming for your full-time job, because that's beyond the target. That's beyond the internship. And so if you think about full-time recruiting and how that works, a lot of times people will accept an offer to return to the company that they interned with, and a lot of times they won't. So you need to figure out, given your developmental goals and where you are vis-a-vis the career change that you want to see, if there even is a change that you want to see, how best can you use that summer to set yourself up for success in the fall of your second year? And so for some people, that means you want to experiment. You want to actually do something radically different. You've been a consultant for 4 years. You have an offer to return to consulting, or maybe you don't have an offer, but you feel pretty good about your chances of getting recruited into consulting your second year, and you want to try working for a startup over the summer. Great. Or you're like me, you're coming from, an untraditional background and you want to go into consulting. Okay, probably get on that for the internship, because that's your best chance to get your foot in the door for full time. So it's to really take a long-term strategy, like be thinking 2 or 3 steps ahead, and then begin acting out that plan beforehand, and acting out the plan primarily. And I think I've said this in just about every answer that I've given, is know who you are and build relationships. So it's think about who you are and think about what you want, make some choices, and then connect with people who can help you.
Wonderful. I love that analogy as well. And if our listeners want to test that out as an analogy for their life, let's all use a punching bag to see what it's like to reach beyond the target. But that's incredible. I really like that.
Well, it's also useful. It's also useful when you're trying to break boards. So like as an 11-year-old, I was breaking boards with I was breaking boards with my fists and my feet. And really the secret is you have to just aim for the wall, not for the board.
So Angela, this is specific to you and your business and your clients. So folks that you work with in the application phase of business school, do you keep in touch with applicants during their MBA? What do they say?
Absolutely, I do. I mean, I love this job because primarily because I love the people that I get to work with. I chose to focus on MBAs in my coaching because MBAs are, and this is not to insult any other professional degree program, but in my experience, MBAs are some of the most ambitious, globally minded, visionary, inspiring people. You go to business school because you want to build something, because you want to create in the world. You want to make a difference. I don't know that I've, in the thousands of people that I've spoken to, it's a handful of people that weren't approaching business school because they didn't have some bigger vision for the impact that they could have in their lives, and so it's just such a privilege to be able to work with people who have a vision and who want to make a difference. So of course I keep in touch with them. Not everyone, but most people. I just had phone calls with all my Harvard first years. I'm catching up with them to find out about how their first year at Harvard went. And so they say the first semester is the most stressful period of time of their lives. That's pretty much the consensus. But they also say that it's the best time of their life. And most people know that it is. I work with people also who were many years post MBA, and almost everyone agrees that the MBA is at some level the best time of your life. It's the time when you are calling forth the most of who you are, because to even survive your classes, you have to marshal every ounce of intellect and ability to read between the lines and ability to thrive even when you're completely underprepared. Like, it takes everything you've got to make it through those 2 years, and you're doing it alongside of brilliant, motivated, committed people. So it's rough, but I haven't met anyone who would trade it.
That brought me back to business school. Everything you said about how intense it is, but how incredible it is. I was just like having very fluid memories of what it was like for me. And it's so true. So thank you for that. And to wrap up, I want to say thank you so much, Angela, for joining us today. Listeners, you can learn more about Angela and Career Protocol at careerprotocol.com. Sign up for a free strategy session and learn all about her and her services.